two things that I need to talk about, which I would like to say before I begin is, since I'm outside, I'm not at my home right now. So if you experience any kind of background noise or something and you're not able to hear properly, you're please, feel free to interrupt me and then I can repeat that again for you. So there might be a lot of background noise, so that might be a source of disturbance. And the second thing for today is that I do not have slides prepared because I was kind of running, I had a time crunch, I had a lot of other stuff that I was occupied with. But I don't think that would be a problem because I would speak like I usually do. And in case you get stuck on something and if you need to, you need me to clarify, you can interrupt and I'll repeat it once again for you. But to begin with, I think first start with structuralism and then we can move on to feminism and post-colonialism. So with structuralism, the basic, the premise itself is that um, without any sort of a structure, the world would be reduced to a sort of a random continuum wherein everything would be in a constant state of flux, in a constant state of chaos. So we need structures because structures help us to organize the world in a meaningful and a comprehensible manner. This is the basic premise of structuralism. Why at all do we need structures to begin with? This is the basic premise. So what structures do is structures make the world comprehensible to us. They arrange things in order for us, they kind of organize things out for us, and that is why in a way they kind of help us make sense of the world. This is the basic premise of structuralism. Now, with structuralism, I think there are several important people who kind of gave out very important ideas. The first, of course, is someone called Ferdinand de Saussure, and Saussure was primarily a linguist. The one text by Saussure that we all talk about and that's really kind of relevant is, of course, something called this text called the Course on General Linguistics. Now, the Course on General Linguistics is not a text that Saussure himself writes. It is rather a compendium of his lecture notes. So he kind of lectured students, and his students took down notes from his lectures, and that was compiled into a sort of a text, and this was brought out by his own students. So this particular text by Ferdinand de Saussure is called Course on General Linguistics. Now, the entire project that Saussure kind of starts out with could be called, semiology. So I'm going to type out the word in the chat box so that people know what I'm talking about. So semiology, semiology, and this basically means semiology means a science of signs. So science of signs, right? And so the basic idea again is that ultimately communication is all about signs. So when you communicate with another individual, you are basically communicating with the help of signs. And if we can, so sort thought that if we can devise some kind of a science of sign, then we could properly kind of have a linguistic structure that would help us to communicate better. So he set out to find a system wherein he could kind of structurally, he could structure different signs, and this is what he calls a science of signs. The word is called semiology. This was what Saussure he started out to do. That was his entire project. And then the word semiotics, as we know it, is not a word that Saussure coins. In fact, the word semiotics is coined by an American linguist whose name is Charles Sanders Peirce. Yes. So this person, he coins this word semiotics. Semiotics again is a discipline or a field of study that would study signs or systems of signification. That is what semiotics means. According to Saussure, the first formulation that Saussure comes up with is that all signs are arbitrary. So he says that there is nothing intrinsic, there is no inherent intrinsic meaning about one particular sign. So meanings are assigned to sounds arbitrarily. So if I say any word, so if I say cat, if I say tree, if I say dog, if I say bat, then these words do not inherently have any meaning within them. There is no intrinsic meaning within them. So if I say dog, dog does is it's an arbitrary, acoustic sound that you hear. It does not really have any inherent meaning that would kind of remind you of that four-legged animal that you pet and that you also find out in the streets. So meanings are arbitrarily assigned to words. That is the first premise that Saussure, that is the first thing that he starts off with. And then, of course, Saussure also talks about something where he says this, that the whole idea of arbitrariness is coupled up with convention. So what when I say the word dog, whatever image comes up in your mind is something that is that you have caught, that you have learned out of social conventions. When I say cat, if you picture a kitten, right, then that is something that has been ascribed due to social conventions, but the word cat itself does not have anything intrinsically within it to remind you of a kitten. That is the basic idea. So uh, this again leads us to understand that there then effectively needs to be some kind of a, some kind of a conventional sharing of meaning within a certain linguistic community for us to be able to understand signs, for us to be able to understand and comprehend the meanings of different words. So within one linguistic community, the word cat denotes this particular animal. Within another linguistic community, a particular word would denote another particular animal. So, a shared sense of convention is how we make meaning out of signs, and signs do not, invariably contain any intrinsic meaning. That is the idea. So if there is nothing intrinsic about there is no intrinsic meaning in a sign, and if all meaning is kind of based upon a kind of a shared consensus in a linguistic community, then Saussure kind of he kind of thinks, he kind of comes up with a set of binary oppositions. So one word, the word cat, the word dog, the word bat, makes sense only because it is not another word. So cat is cat because it is not dog, it is not tiger, it is not lion. So here again the idea that comes out is the idea of difference. So one's word can make meaning to us comprehensible, if one word becomes comprehensible when it is differentiated with another word. And this is how the idea of difference comes into the picture. And Saussure kind of, he kind of uh, uh, comes up with several sets of binary oppositions. And he kind of also, he says that there are several sets of binaries according to Saussure. And the first to understand his schema of linguistic uh, signification, what the first thing that he says is that in signification, or within the realm of language, there are only differences, and this is the backbone, in fact, of Saussurean thought. And these differences can only be understood in terms of binary oppositions. So if therefore, the entire oeuvre of Saussure revolves around this particular foundational principle of these binary oppositions, then it becomes important for us to understand, to be able to unpack these binary oppositions. So some of the oppositions that Saussure very famously gives out would be something called signifier, signified, that I think people are familiar with, but I'm still going to kind of type these out. Signifier, signified. Then there's something called paradigmatic and syntagmatic, right? Um, so basically one of the very one of the most, the commonplace idea of signifier signified is that the signifier would the signified and the signifier would be that the signifier is the sound word or the word that conjures up an image, the image being the signified. So this is the commonsensical idea. So if I say tree, the word tree, the sound image, right? The word tree, or the sound of the word tree would be the signifier, and the image that the word conjures up in your mind would be the signified. The actual tree that you that you can think of becomes a signified. This is the common, idea of what is a signifier and what is a signified. But in very purest terms, in within Sassurian linguistics, signifier and signified are not conflatable with the objects. So the word the four letter word tree, and the image of a tree that comes up in your mind, these are not really what Sassur would mean, or what he would identify as a signifier or signified. They refer in instead, within Sassurian linguistics, signifier and signified refer to an action that happens within our mind. So firstly, these two words, signifier and signified, they concern external objects, but more than that, they have to do a lot with a certain sense of a mental process. So the signifier, which helps in signification, right, is called the sound image or the acoustic image, right? And the signifier is not the word, but the image that the word casts on your cognitive apparatus. This is the idea. It is not simply it's not simply the word tree, the four letter word is not what we would call a signifier. The signifier instead is the sound image, the acoustic image that helps to cast the image of the tree as you would visualize it onto your mental apparatus. And the object image that is cast onto your mental apparatus, or the concept that you think of immediately when you hear the word tree, is the signified, right? The actual external object is not the signified, because if I say the word tree, someone can think of a pine tree, somebody can think of a mango tree, somebody can think of a guava tree, you can think of several different trees. But the basic, the basic tree, but you know that it's got a bark, and it's got a trunk, it's got several branches, and there are leaves on it. That is the basic concept. Now that basic concept, it might be different for different individuals. People might think of it as a signifier, others might think of it as a signified. But the basic concept is the signifier. The basic concept is the signified. And the basic concept is objects. So it is not conflatable. Signifier and signified are not conflatable with mere objects only. That is the first thing. And the second thing that we need to talk about, the other set of contradictions, the other set of the other dichotomy that Saussure talks about, is of course syntagmatic and paradigmatic. What does that mean? So the idea is that if we are, you know if we are communicating, we do not really communicate with one sign only. We communicate, we utter complete sentences, complete paragraphs. And so one sentence or one paragraph is made up of several signs. So any sentence that you write would not only consist of one sign but several signs arranged in a certain order. And then if you write a paragraph, then there would be several signs arranged both horizontally as well as vertically. So the idea of a a syntagmatic line would be what if you write a sentence. So if you write any kind of a sentence, so if you write, say, I saw a cat today, if that is a sentence that you're making, then you know that within this sentence there are several signs, right? I saw cat, all of this. Now, the fact that all these words in a sentence are arranged in a linear manner, there is a linear association of signs within this particular sentence. The words are arranged also in a horizontal manner and not in a sort of a vertical manner. They are arranged horizontally. So that kind of a formation is called a syntagmatic formation. That is called a syntagm, which means a part of a sentence. And then we have something which is called a paradigmatic formation. Now, what is a paradigmatic formation? Paradigmatic basically means which kind of denotes in the entire scheme of things. So, a part of a if a sign is a part of a sentence where different signs are arranged horizontally, then we would call that a syntagmatic kind of a association, a syntagmatic for sort of a relation. And if we have something that is arranged in a in a scheme of things, like if you pick out a sentence or one sign out of one sentence, that would be in the larger scheme of things. So that would be a paradigmatic sort of an arrangement. Uh, what basically we you can kind of to simplify this further would be that a sign basically, it comes to mean any sign makes a certain sense of meaning. It comes to mean something by the sheer association, by its sheer association with other signs. So these several signs that we're talking about, which help in the meaning making process, these signs, they could be horizontally arranged, they could be horizontally associated, they could also be vertically associated, they could be vertically arranged. So if they are horizontally associated, then we would, if in a horizontal line, then we would call that syntagmatic kind of an association. And if they are arranged in a vertical way, as in one sentence or in a big paragraph, there is a linear horizontal association of signs. There is also a vertical association of signs. So if it is a vertical association of signs, then we would call that a syntagmatic kind of a paradigmatic kind of an association. Another kind of a dichotomy, or another kind of a binary opposition that Saussure comes up with, is that between langue and parole. Now, with langue and parole, basically what happens is, and the idea is that to kind of really simplify this for you, that there is, just to give you an example, we know that there is no one English language. There are several Englishes available. So, what I mean by this is the kind of English that one would speak in India would be very different from the kind of English, say, someone living in Africa is speaking, or someone living in Ireland is speaking, someone living in Australia speaks a completely different kind of English. So, we know that English as a linguistic sort of a register, of course, has several registers, sub-registers within it. So, langue, therefore, would be the language English. And parole refers to a speech act. So, any one instance of English speaking could be denoted as parole. So, maybe Irish, so an Irishman speaking English, his speech act, his act of speaking English, the English that he uses could be an example of parole. Me being an Indian, the way I speak English, the kind of English that I speak, that could be another example of parole. Somebody living in Australia, someone living in Africa, the different kinds of English that they speak would be again an example of parole. But English itself, the linguistic entity, right, that exists, English itself would be your langue, and parole would be the specific speech act I hope the distinction between lang and parole is clear, right? And these are some of the basic assumptions, or these are some of the basic premises that Ferdinand de Saussure he sets out these basic kind of assumptions. But you have to remember that Saussure, structuralism kind of begins with linguistics, because one of the founding fathers of structuralism, as it were, would be Ferdinand de Saussure, and Saussure himself was a linguist. Now, if structuralism, then the basic premise would be that uh, structuralism recognizes that there are contradictions all around us, because as it is evident, which I previously explained, is that there are different words. All words, they differ from each other. They make meaning is possible only through difference. So and difference implies contradiction. So if structuralism finds itself in a realm where there are only contradictions, structuralism then tries to list those contradictions under some kind of a basic structural, some kind of a basic structural, schematic apparatus. That is what structuralism, tries to or sets out to do. Because it although it's aware of the contradictions that surrounds it, it it still tries to cull out some sort of a master formula, some kind of a structural framework to give, uh, to make meaning out of this horrific plurality that surrounds it. So that is the basic idea of structuralism. And all of the people that we talk about when we talk about structuralism, all these people that are known as structuralists, what they do is they try to follow the same method. So within whatever domain that they're working within, they will always try to find out or cull out some kind of a basic structure, some kind of a master structure, which when set out, and then you take that structure and you kind of try to read any text, any narrative, all of the component parts of that narrative will adhere to that structure. That is the basic task of the structuralist, right? That is the basic task of the structuralist critique. Now, another person after Ferdinand de Saussure that we need to talk about when we talk about structuralism is, of course, someone called Claude Lévi-Strauss. Now, Claude Lévi-Strauss was an anthropologist, and even in his works, in Lévi-Strauss's works, the basic idea is once again that he tries to come up with some kind of a master structure, some kind of a structure with the help of which he will be able to explain a lot of things. And being an anthropologist, of course, he was concerned with cultures, right? He was studying societies, and he was studying ancient cultures and pre-modern cultures and all of that. And Claude Lévi-Strauss also agrees that there are differences across cultures. One culture is obviously different from the other culture. So there is this implicit agreement within Lévi-Strauss that there are differences. Differences exist even within different cultures. But then he also tries to, being a true structuralist, he also tries to come up with one commonality, one common, some kind of a common ground, some kind of a common center. He also tries to call up that thing. And then his entirely scholarly enterprise, of course, has been to, to find out that one shared commonality between cultures despite their differences. And so, he comes up with ideas of taboo, he comes up with ideas of incest, you know because he says that I have been to this part of the world, I have looked at this culture, I have been to that part of the world, I've looked at their cultures, and yes, these cultures are different, but there is something inherently common between these cultures as well, no matter whatever diverse apparent differences they have. If people in Africa, they have some kind of a conception about taboo and incest, this is also something that you find in people in India as well. So people in India also, they have some kind of a conventional, or some kind of a normative order wherein they talk about taboo and incest. So this is just to give you an example. So even within differing cultures, even within cultures which are very varied, continents apart, even then, uh, taking note, of course, of the diverse differences that kind of flourish within different cultures, for Claude Lévi-Strauss, being a true structuralist, he also tries to call out some kind of a structural similarity between differing structures. This is Claude Lévi-Strauss. And then, of course, we have someone called Roland Barthes. Now, Roland Barthes, of course, is again someone that we associate, I won't really generalize this, but Barth had kind of, you could say that he had these two distinct phases, one was a structuralist phase, and then after that came a post structuralist phase. Now, in the structuralist phase, when we talk about someone like Roland Barthes, of course, um, Barth tries to, he tries to analyze any kind of a narrative that you hand out to him. He tried to analyze that structurally. He would try to analyze any narrative like a true and proper structuralist. Now, the structuralist objective, as we know, is of course to boil down any narrative to some kind of a master formula that gives some sort of a similitude, some kind of a similarity to the a basic common ground to the otherwise diverse variegated texts. That is the idea. And Barth, of course, his major work would be within the realm of folklore or folklore studies. Well, not Barth, but folklore studies kind of becomes that domain on which structuralist criticism kind of worked really well. And different cultures have different kinds of folklores. So if someone is from Maharashtra and they talk about Marathi folklore, I am from West Bengal, I talk about Bangla folklore. Someone is from, say, somewhere else in North India, and they talk about that regional folklore. And someone is from Russia, they talk about Russian folklore. But at the end of the day, what happens is, within all these folklores, within all these varied stories from varied cultures, we always, the structuralist critique would always try to find out some major some major themes, some major thematic concerns that would be present in every folklore across different cultures. That is the basic idea. That is what within folklore studies structuralists attempt to do. And one of the people that kind of really becomes really important is someone called Vladimir Prop. Now, Vladimir Prop, of course, has this text where I think it's called Morphology of the Russian Folk Tale. I'm going to type this out. Um, yep. So Vladimir Prop, in Morphology of the Russian Folk Tale, he kind of compares folklores across the universe, folklores across the globe, and he was a folklorist, of course. And what basically happens is that Prop identifies 31 functions in all. He identifies 31 functions. He lays out these 31 functions, and he says that each of these functions is present in in these varied folk tales across different cultures. So you give me a Russian folk tale, I will point out I can simplify that folk tale into these 31 functions. You give me an Indian folk tale, I can simplify that folk tale, or I can kind of dissect that folk tale into these 31 functions. So whatever whatever folk tale from whichever part of the world you provide to me, I will basically break that down into certain functions, and these functions, you will find these functions in my set of 31 functions. So nothing outside this one master set of 31 functions that I have given to you exists in any folktale all over the world. This is something that Vladimir Prop kind of, this is something that he kind of tries to do. Vladimir Prop is important to structuralism because, of course, folklore studies even today within folklore research, the lot of the people who are who are leading folklorists, their method of research, their research methodology is, of course, structuralist critique. That is something that folklorists do. So Vladimir Prop in that regard becomes a very important person. And then again, I'll go to Barth now. Of course, with Roland Barthes, I said that Roland Barthes is he was a structuralist, and then he also marks the turn from structuralism to post-structuralism, and then we see Barthes as a post-structuralist as well. Now, Barthes basically, well, he's often called a limit structuralist. I'll type that out as well. Because while Barth tries to, he kind of adheres to structuralist principles at one point of time in his career, he also gradually also exhibits or displays in his works the limits of structuralism. Beyond, like, he kind of gives out those limits, that this is the point till which structuralism holds, and then beyond that, structuralism falls flat. The principles of structuralism do not hold anymore. So he kind of denotes for us, he kind of points out, he kind of gives out the markers of structuralism, as it were. And that is why he is also sometimes referred to as a limit structuralist. Now, one of the important works that we need to talk about when we talk about Barth is of course this idea that he writes this particular he writes this text which is called From Work to Text. This is something that Barth writes. But before I come to that, in the structuralist phase of his career, Barth analyzes a kind of text, one text by someone called Honoré de Balzac. Now, I'm typing this out, but the name kind of Honoré de Balzac, and the name, of course, Honoré de Balzac. There are some accents on some of the letters, and I think that you can Google out and find out on your own. But what Barth does is he takes this text called Sarracine by Honoré de Balzac, and he tries to, according to structuralist principles, he kind of tries to break down this narrative into certain functions, and he tries to kind of he attempts a structuralist critique of this particular text by Honoré de Balzac. And Barth also, like the structuralists, therefore, he tries to cobble up some deep core, some kind of a deep structure, some inherent structure. And when he tries to do that, he does that for some time, and then he finds that there are differences that cannot, uh, you know, that cannot be, merged into some kind of a structure. He is no longer able to kind of merge any kind of difference into a structure. So when he kind of, um when he faces that kind of a situation, he is of course mindful of the fact that the elusive structure which structuralism tries to unearth, which structuralism tries to cull forward, that kind of a structure, it has problems of its own, right? Because when you're trying to kind of come out with master structures, you realize that there is a play of differences all around, and you can only create structures to a certain extent. Beyond that, there is only difference, and coming up with a comprehensible a solid structure is no longer possible. And this particular realization, in fact, prefigures Barth's kind of his shift, the shift from structuralism to post-structuralism. Now, um, Barth kind of gives out very significant formulations as far as post-structuralism is concerned, but the one text that we need to talk about, that Barth kind of writes, that this text is called "From Work to Text." And what is basically what Barth is talking about, he's saying that rather than being horrified and at this endless play of difference, and rather than trying to figure out a deep underlying structure, let us instead regale in this play of differences. Let us instead celebrate this play of differences. That seems to be the basic premise of post-structuralism. And this particular shift in methodology is marked by Barthes in this work, From Work to Text. And this is again sometime around the end of the 19th century. Someone can I think so 19th or 20th century, someone can google that up and you'll know the dates. But with this work, From Work to Text, what happens is it basically alters the way in which we look at literary volumes. Now I am using the word, for a literary text I'm using the word volume, because as it becomes apparent in this work, in this particular treatise that Barth writes, that From Work to Text, Barth uses literary work, the word work, to denote something, and the word text to denote something else. So I will, so that is why I'm using the word literary volume to distinguish it from how Barth conceives of a text, what he conceives of as a literary work, and again to distinguish that from what he conceives of as a literary text. Now, two different approaches emerge according to Barth. So he says that we used to treat literary volumes as literary works. So when do we call a literary volume as a literary work? And Barth says that literary work is that which you can almost hold in your own hands, right? Things that you could in like things that you had the freedom to interpret, things that you could interpret on your own. So for example, if I give you say a novel, any novel that you can think of. So there, a novel, before prior to Barth's formulation, a novel could be a literary work. So I could talk about, say, Wuthering Heights. I could talk about well,
Pride
any
and Prejudice, my favorite novel till date.
yeah, of course. Any novel that you can pick up. So Barth says that earlier these literary volumes, they would be called literary works. But what is the difference then, according to Barth, between a literary work and a literary text? That is what he's trying to formulate in this particular treatise. He says that from the end of the 19th century onwards, we have been treating literary volumes differently. Earlier, if we used to treat literary volumes as works, now we are treating them as literary texts. What is the difference then? So, the basic idea is that with a literary work, you are reading that literary volume in a certain way, and with a literary text, you're reading the work in a different way. You are reading the same work. You could take up Pride and Prejudice, you could read it as a literary work, and you could take up Pride and Prejudice and you would read it as a literary text. What is the difference? He says that when we are picking up a literary work, we are kind of, when we are saying that, a particular text or a particular novel, say Pride and Prejudice, is a literary work, we are kind of fixing a sort of meaning. We are kind of universally fixing a meaning to that particular volume of Pride and Prejudice. But when we are denoting Pride and Prejudice, when we are saying that it is a text, we are allowing a sort of we are trying to kind of destabilize any universal meaning that the text might contain. So you as an individual, if you say, if you identify Pride and Prejudice as a literary work, then the meaning that work would enshrine, the meaning that work would contain, would it would be self-contained, the meaning. Like the way I interpret Pride and Prejudice would be similar to how you interpret Pride and Prejudice. There would not be an endless play of meanings that the text would offer to us. But when we talk about a literary a text, what happens? My interpretation of Pride and Prejudice might be different from Ananya's interpretation of Pride and Prejudice, and that is the work of this shift from a work to a text. The basic premise is, of course, that it allows for a greater exploration of meaning, allows us to enter into this realm of endless difference. It allows us to enter into this realm of differential meanings. So the meaning of a text can no longer be locked down, that this is what Pride and Prejudice means. When I am saying that Pride and Prejudice is a text, it's a literary text and not a literary work. When I'm saying it's a literary text, I of course mean that the meaning of Pride and Prejudice can be differential. It can, there can be several meanings, there can be several interpretations of that particular text, and different individuals can come up with different interpretations. There is no single universal interpretation of Pride and Prejudice. This is the idea. So think of it as a never ending process, not a one way kind of a meaning making process, that this is the only meaning that Pride and Prejudice can have. But there are several meanings that Pride and Prejudice can have. I can talk about, money, the theme of money in Pride and Prejudice. That could be major for me. Someone can talk about the theme of marriage in Pride and Prejudice. That would be major for them. Someone can talk about feminine relationships in Pride and Prejudice. That would be major for them. So the meaning of a text is no longer, you know, kind of locked down. There is no universal, there is no one universal meaning. That is the basic idea. So rather than thinking of the volume as a definitive set of meanings, Barth identifies the literary volume as a text. And therefore, this shift he identifies as a shift from work, from a literary work, to a literary text. That is the basic premise of this particular work. And within this kind of a formulation again, Barth also, if you remember, Barth also gives out another very important formulation, which he calls, the very, I think, very famous kind of formulation that he gives out is, of course, called, the death of the author. Now, with the death of the author, Roland Barthes, of course, he marks a departure, proper departure from structuralism into the domain of post-structuralism. Now, what Barthes is doing in the death of the author is that he is announcing the death of the author. He's ushering in the death of the author. But this is not a literal death. So Jonathan Swift has not died. Jane Austen is not dead. Like, he's not saying the death of the author means the author is dead. It is not a literal death. It is in fact a metaphorical death, right? So what does he try to do with this kind of a conception of the death of the author? He is basically trying to usher in an era of joyous freedom, wherein the text is no longer rooted to whatever meaning making that the author would want you to. I mean, the author is no longer the authorial figure is kind of decentered. The authorial figure is dismissed. That earlier, what would happen would be that any kind of a whatever meaning that one could kind of think of about a text would be authorial intent would be like that would gain primacy. So what did this author try to do? What did he set out to do? What did he intend to do? That would be the idea. But Barth is saying that the author figure is not that important. He kind of gives primacy now to the reader, to the audience. Each individual who is reading the text is involved in this process of meaning making. So the author is decentered, the author is the authorial intent is sort of destabilized with the idea of the death of the author. So with the death of the author then comes the birth of the reader. Now, as Barth he moves from structuralism to post-structuralism, there is also a shift in attention from the text as something that is produced by the author, to a text as something that is produced by the reader. So remember, in the previous session, I think in one of the sessions, I spoke about a readerly text, a writerly text, kind of explained the differences between what do we mean by a readerly text and what do I mean by a writerly text. So that idea again becomes very relevant here, because when we move from meaning making as decided by the author, that if that would be a reader text, all of it is kind of worked out for you. You are a passive reader. the meaning is made out for you. All of that is done. You just have to read and you'll understand. But when we say that there is a shift from the author, and now meaning has to be made by the reader or the audience, then of course we're talking about a writerly text. And a writerly text is of course that follows the engaged kind of an engaged sort of an activity, a sort of a continuous engagement with the text that the reader needs to do. That is, so this is basically the shift with that Barth kind of talks about when he talks about the death of the author. So, according to Barth, therefore, in the absence of the author, the claim to decipher, the claim to make complete meaning of a text becomes futile, because the author figure is no longer there to guide you, to tell you that this is the only possible meaning of my text. You as an individual author, several people as individual readers, several people as individual audiences are free to come up with their versions of the text, with their versions of the kind of meaning that the text makes for them. This is the basic idea of Barth's death of the author. This paradoxical idea is very, very important because it, as opposed to commonsensical knowledge, it does not really prefigure an empirical or literal death of a given author, but it of course refers to that, that in a very radical way, it kind of refers to the idea that the author is absent from the text, that is the author figure is no longer required within the text to make meaning of the text. We do not really need to pay attention to authorial intent in the text. That is the idea. Because we think of the author as uh, we think, our practice of reading and criticism kind of foregrounds the author in the locus of authority, the authorial figure who wields some kind of an authority as far as meaning making is concerned. And therefore this particular approach, what it does is it basically confines meaning and significance to a single univocal strand. So only one voice speaks out, the voice of the author gives out a certain meaning of the text, and meaning is therefore self-contained within the text. But I think I also need to talk a bit about Michel Foucault here. So Foucault says, he kind of aligns, he rightly agrees with Barth, and he says that the author is therefore the ideological figure by which one individual marks the manner in which we fear the proliferation of meaning. So basically, what he's trying to say, this is a quote from Foucault again, but what he's trying to say is that the author figure kind of with his one authorial meaning, one authorial intent, one authorial meaning of a text, he kind of fixes meaning. He fixes meaning into a rigid sort of a kind of a system. But and what this kind of a fixing does is, this kind of a rigidity kind of it stops short. It puts a lock almost. It kind of puts a lock into us talking about a greater proliferation of meanings, a proliferation of meaning, an endless play of meanings. That is something that is ultimately stopped when we go with authorial intent. So there is, within post-structuralism, there is the attempt is of course to do away with any kind of authorial intent, any kind of centralizing, any kind of univocal authorial intent. That is the idea. This is basically what Barth talks about when he talks about the death of the author. Now, another person that we need to talk about when we talk about post-structuralism is, of course, someone called Jacques Derrida. Now, Derrida, again, I think most of you are familiar with Derrida, but Derrida, of course, is philosophically, as a philosopher, Derrida is concerned with the decentering of our intellectual universe. Now, following Barth's idea that the meaning that meaning, there is an endless play of meaning to a particular text. No, so Derrida comes into the picture at this precise moment when Barth kind of proclaims that there is a play of endless meanings. Derrida therefore kind of philosophizes that if there are endless meanings, then the universe as we know it, the world as we know it, stands decentered. It is no longer the world that structuralists have dreamed of. We do not have any particular structures. We do not have any core center. The universe, the world as we know it, or as we have known it, stands decentered. There are no absolute fixed points. There is no longer an authoritative center, because Barth already kind of he marks the death of the author. Any kind of authoritative center kind of falls away. Now, Derrida, I think he's important within post structuralism, of course, because of his this formulation that he comes that he gives out is the idea of deconstruction, or how to perform a deconstructive reading. Right, Derrida is kind of he. That is why he's important. But now, Derrida basically well says that deconstruction is actually uh, post-structuralism when you put it into, post-structuralism as theory. When you put post-structuralism into praxis, when it becomes a practice from theory to praxis, so that would be deconstruction would be a reading against the grain. It is actually post-structuralism applied, post-structuralism practice. Post-structuralism in practice would be deconstruction. Now, Derrida basically gives out some really important formulations, but um, as far as deconstructive reading is concerned, Derrida says that if the relation between the signifier and the signified is arbitrary, which we know as we have done, we've read Saussure, and all language is relational, then the process of reading, right, is of course a movement from one signifier, that is from one word, one signifier. Just hold on for a second. Excuse me for a minute. Yes. So as I was saying, so if the relation between the signifier and the signified is arbitrary, as we know from Saussure, and if all language is relational, then the process of reading, of course, marks a movement from one signified to another, one signifier to another. So we can never really come to the end of signification and discover one true meaning, one truth from any text, because meaning is always kind of deferred and deferred. This is the idea that Jacques Derrida, he that this is the idea that he gives out, because when we get to the end of a text, because of the meaningless play of signification, because of the relational differences between one signifier and the other, we are not faced with a final signified, right? We're not faced with one meaning, we're not faced with a unified meaning, right? But yet we are faced with yet another signifier. So this is what Derrida basically calls, he uses this term, he uses this term called difference. Difference as different from difference. Difference, where what he means by that is that meaning is both deferred as well as deferred. This is the idea. So I think these are kind of difficult concepts to kind of grasp, but just to kind of simplify this for you, this deferral of meaning and this inability to kind of come to kind of attain a final one significant truth, or the one significant meaning. I'll try to simplify that for you. So what Derrida means by this word difference is that he says that the meaning of a signifier, right, which is born out of difference, is eternally deferred. That is, the meaning is eternally delayed. And this is what the word difference kind of signifies. Meaning is differential. So the word difference kind of contains within it these two ideas: difference and a delay of meaning. Because within a different signs, every word is different from another word, and that is how we make sense of the meaning of a word, right, by means of difference. But because every word differs from every other word, because one sign differs from the the adjoining sign. Therefore there is an endless play of differences, there is an endless deferral of meaning that comes into play. So in order to understand this further, suppose I take a signifier A. Suppose the letter A is one signifier. Now, in order to understand the meaning of this particular signifier, what I need to do is I have to understand its oppositional relationship with, say, another signifier. So let's say, for example, I take another signifier B. So if the letter B is another signifier, so in order to understand the meaning of A, I have to understand the meaning of B. And B is I can only understand the meaning of B because B is not equal to A. The meaning of the signifier B is different from the meaning of the signifier A. But then again, remember that B is also caught up in another. B itself is caught up in a chain of signification. B, the meaning of B is different from, say, another signifier C. So in this way, you see how my original aim was to I set out to find out the meaning of the signifier A, but I cannot really come to an absolute meaning of the signifier A until and unless I exhaust the meanings of all the signifiers that A is in a oppositional relationship with. So I to find out the meaning of A, I go to B. So but I have to know the meaning of B, so I go to C. But then I have to know the meaning of C, so I go to D, and endlessly this chain continues. So in this particular way, what happens is meaning is delayed, meaning is deferred, and this is basically a process that goes on and on and on, and therefore we can never really come to an to a fixed meaning. We cannot come to a fixed signified, so meaning is always deferred. So this is basically what Derrida talks about when he uses the term differos. So the deferral of meaning, right, the differential relations of signs and the deferral of meaning that arises out of such kind of a differential relation is is what the term difference would connote. That is the idea. Now, if structuralism is in fact, if structuralism is interested in how meaning is produced and how texts work, right? Because structuralism comes up with this sort of a master narrative, not a narrative, I mean, it comes up with sort of a master structure to lay out meanings for you and to make sense. You read those structures and you make sense of, okay, what meaning does this text make to us? That is how you make meanings of a text within a structuralist framework. But deconstruction is interested, however, in the contradictions, in the play of meanings, in the endless play of meanings, and meanings which resist any final meaning, any final signification. That is what deconstruction, tries to do. So, deconstructive reading, in fact, as a theoretical tool, as a methodological tool, deconstruction is interested in the hierarchic binaries, right? It sets up binaries within texts. And in each of these binaries, I'll give you an example, but in each of these binaries, what we see is one term. A binary is made up of two terms, so one term is always privileged over the other. So a deconstructive reading, what it would do is it would identify a binary. Of course, that's the first thing that it would do, and it would try to subvert that binary. So if one term is privileged in that binary, it would try to look a deconstructive reading would try to look at how the other term could also be privileged. That is something that a deconstructive reading would try to do. And then deconstruction, through kind of showing how the less privileged term is central to the dominant term, it would try to subvert that binary. And then in the next step, once the subversion of the binary is done, deconstruction will also tell you that this subversion is not the final. This subversion is not the final stage of deconstructive reading. Deconstruction would then kind of try to recognize that both the terms in a binary, none of these terms are privileged. None of these terms can come to dominate the other. Both these terms are necessary to make meaning of the other term. So one very basic example that comes up, and I think this is a very basic example that people can understand, is let's take up one binary man woman, right? Within patriarchal thought, of course, man would be the privileged term within traditional modes of thought. You know, man would be the privileged term. But what a deconstructionist reading would do, it would try to subvert this hierarchy, man above woman. How would it do that? Deconstructionists would argue that man, if okay fine, man is the privileged term in this binary, but man cannot really function without a woman. I mean, what I'm trying to say is that man would not even exist without a woman. If the woman does not give birth, if reproductive activity for a woman stops, man would no longer come into existence. So that is how now woman is important. Man is not that important. Woman is important because woman is the one who kind of procreates. Woman is the one who gives birth. So why not why not give primacy to woman? And this is how you see the hierarchy is subverted. But then again it's not enough to just say that a woman is kind of dominant over man. That is not where deconstructive reading ends, right? Deconstruction does not ask us to pick one version of the binary and then reject the other, to pick one term of the binary and reject the other, right? Rather, it tells us to place these two opposite meanings one over the other. In the first step, man was the dominant kind of term, and then with the deconstructionist reading, we I kind of give woman that primacy. But then again, put it very simply, you cannot you really cannot, because you cannot kind of confer some sense of a hierarchy of one term over the other. Therefore we cannot really, once again, within deconstructionist reading we see that if I cannot prioritize man and if I cannot prioritize woman, the only conclusion that I can come to is that I cannot really give one hierarchical position to any one of these terms, because these terms are constantly in a differential oppositional relation to each other. So deconstruction then kind of forces us or compels us to not look for hierarchical binaries, hierarchical dominant terms within a binary, but to acknowledge the role of difference and how fruitful that difference can be. This is the basic premise of deconstructionist reading. This was just to kind of give you a brief idea of how a deconstructionist reading is done. And if you want to kind of read up more, you can do that. You can just Google any kind of basic, you can just Google deconstruction or examples of deconstruction, and I think you'll be good to go. But uh, as far as Derrida is concerned, Derrida also, he talks about these other terms. There are a few other terms that Derrida talks about. So he talks about something called traces. He talks about something called metaphysics of presences. So what are these things? Derrida says that first of all, let's deal with what he means by traces. Traces, TRACES. This is basically what Derrida means. So he says that because each element, right, because each element kind of gains its identity with reference to other elements. So one sign gains its meaning with reference to other signs. Therefore, within a structure, each sign contains a spectral or a ghost like presence of all those other elements that have contributed to make the meaning of this particular element. If you go back to the previous example that I gave, the signifier A, to make the meaning of the signifier A, we were looking at other signifiers like B, C, D, and so on and so forth. So the final meaning, so the meaning that we can ascribe to the signifier A will always contain traces of the meanings that we have ascribed to signifiers B, C, D, E, and so on. So this spectral or ghost like quality, this spectral or ghost like presence of other signifiers within one signifier basically uh, helps us to once again posit one signifier within a relational scheme of things, within a relational scheme of things with other signifiers. And so this ghost like presence of one signifier in another signifier is what Derrida would call traces. And in the structural scheme of things, of course, we know that meaning for the structuralists, meaning was not eternally deferred, because signifiers were made sense by arranging them. Remember the paradigmatic arrangement, the syntagmatic arrangement. So if you arrange words, signs in a certain way, you would get a certain meaning. That was the idea within structuralist scheme of things. But in like if you understand what I meant by a deconstructive reading, you know how the binaries work, right? So if I take up another binary, say light and dark, you know that there is a certain play of absence and presence. Light is the absence of dark, or darkness is the absence of light. So a certain sense of absence presence is going on, right? And from herein, the meaning of the word, the meaning of the term presence, I think that is how kind of Derrida kind of looks at what he means by presence, is that the terms in a binary which represent presence are treated as self-contained elements which signify an immutable identity. So light, so darkness is means, it means the absence of light, and light of course means that there. So in opposition to darkness, light would signify presence, and likewise darkness would signify absence. So the privileged term in this binary, within this within this hierarchy, the privileged term light, which signifies some kind of a presence, would always be treated as, it would be treated as a self-contained element. It would be hierarchically, it would be privileged. That is the idea. Now the second term, which is darkness, right? Or within the man woman binary, the second term, which is woman, which kind of prefigures a sense of loss, and which is why man would be kind of the dominant term within that binary. So the second term, these second terms in this binary, which represent you know an absence, they are seen as, representing an identity that is made up of negative traces, so traces which are not present. So so absent meaning, of course, the absence of presence, those traces. So light is not present in darkness. Therefore, so darkness is, therefore it denotes something that is made up of negative traces. The absence of light is darkness. So it has got a negative component to it. That is the idea. So this prioritization of presence, this kind of privileging of the presence, the term within the binary which connotes presence, this privileging of this term that connotes presence is what Derrida calls the metaphysics of presence. This is the basic idea. And once again, Derrida also talks about something which is called aporia. Now, aporia is APORIA. Aporia would basically mean, it means, uh, it basically refers to a sort of an impasse, where we have, a lack of resolution. You know, but then an aporia is not something that is that delimits you, that kind of limits you to a certain extent. That when you're reading a text, for example, and there are several signifiers within that text, and if you know what I meant, and if you understood what I meant by deconstructionist reading, you know that those signifiers within a text, they do not have sharp distinct meanings, but rather one signifier, the meaning of one signifier leads to the meaning of another signifier, and so on and so forth. But then you reach a point within that text wherein you reach an impasse, and you reach a phase essentially of a lack of resolution, when meaning making becomes difficult. That is basically what an aporia means. But literally, literary criticism, an aporia, it should not be, it's not exactly a dead end. It is not exactly, a source of meaninglessness, a zone of meaninglessness. It's not that. What Derrida is trying to say is that this impasse, this lack of resolution, in fact leads us to a much further enhanced sort of a appreciation of the complex relationship between the different signifiers of a text. The aporia, although it kind of leads us to a temporary halt as far as meaning making is concerned, is no longer it should not be seen as this stage that is delimiting, beyond which we cannot move. But an aporia is something that is constructive. It does not stop the meaning making process. It kind of extends the meaning making process further beyond to the realm of an absolute anarchic play of differences. So all of these ideas, if you understand these, all of these ideas again, harp back to that one particular framework that Barth gives out, the death of the author, with the death of the author, that meaning making cannot be singular. It is not a univocal monolithic process. Meaning making is, it's not monolithic, it is diverse. There can be several meanings. So within the post structuralist scheme of things, this is the one idea that post structuralist critics, they're always trying to drive at. Meaning or truth or any kind of narrative meaning, narrative truth, there is not one truth, but there are multiple truths. If this is the idea that we need to kind of be mindful of when we talk about post structuralism. Now, post structuralism again, one if one is talking about post structuralism, then we also need to be mindful of this other term, another post, which is postmodernism. Now, postmodernism, I think, postmodernism, we kind of presume that postmodernism is a term that kind of comes into play, or that comes into its own sometime in the 1960s or 1970s. This is a gross kind of a misconception. In fact, postmodernism, the term itself, was coined in the 1870s, sometime around the 1870s, by someone called John Watkins Chapman, if I'm not very mistaken. So, John Watkins Chapman, he coins this term sometime around the 1870s, and basically, then we understand that as early as 1870, the idea of postmodernism was well in existence. Once again, postmodernity and postmodernism, these are two different terms. These denote two different things. Like I previously mentioned with modernity and modernism, postmodernism would be, it would be a cultural practice, it could be an aesthetic way of looking at cultural practices. And postmodernity is, of course, the milieu, the social milieu, the age, that we are talking about. So postmodernity, started somewhere around the 1870s. The age itself, around 1870s, would what historically accurately, that would be the a time when postmodernity, that is the age of the post. Well, I shouldn't say postmodern, but that is when postmodernity comes into its own. And before and it is only, I think, the term gains fruition, like the term kind of comes into kind of popular, within popular parlance, the term comes to be spoken of sometime in the, in during the First World War, from 1914 to 1918. Now, post-modernity is the, of course, is the historical period that emerges from, the fag end of modernity in European political cultural history. So maybe, from well 1914, 1918 onwards, the term comes into kind of dominant predominance, but 1870s is generally kind of posited as the time when post-modernity as a historical period came into being. Now, within post-modernity, there's somebody called Jean-Francois Lyotard, who gives out these two very important ideas of a grand narrative, and he talks about a grand narrative. And what does Lyotard mean when he talks about a grand narrative? That is something that we need to discuss. But to kind of once again make this clear, post-modernity is, it's a social formation. We're talking about a social milieu when we're using the word post-modernity. It's a social formation that kind of, takes root in the last years of the 19th century. And it comes about, it comes into its own about the middle of that century, about the middle of the 20th century, 1950s, 1960s onwards, within European political, cultural, aesthetic thoughts. Uh, be aware of what is postmodernism and what is postmodernity. Postmodernity is the social formation, and postmodernism is the theoretical, philosophical, aesthetic, cultural way of life. It's like I previously mentioned with modernity and modernism. That same difference also holds for postmodernity and postmodernism. Now, we have to talk about these two terms, like grand narratives, and there's something else which is called a potty narrative, or a little potty receipt, or a little narrative. Now, modernism, of course, was it was heavily invested in meta narratives, right? A grand narrative or meta narrative, almost the same thing. uh, so why in the post modern period do we talk about something called a little narrative, and why do we not talk about grand narratives anymore? Postmodernism, in fact, Jean-Francois Lyotard, he kind of describes postmodernism as the incredulity towards meta narratives. And this is a very famous kind of a phrase that he uses. The incredulity towards meta narratives. That is how he describes postmodernism. Basically, modernism was heavily invested in meta narratives. What is a meta narrative, or what are meta narratives? Meta narratives are these age old archetypal stories that would provide a kind of that would provide a kind of schematic worldview on which an individual's personal experiences could be brought together or could be ordered. So, for example, if I have to give you an example of a grand narrative, then I could talk about the grand narrative of Christianity, the grand narrative of industrialization, all of these, the grand narrative of capitalism. So, how one individual within his particular socio-political kind of a milieu, how that individual kind of comes to experience their personal experiential worldview is what what meta narratives would kind of propound. So if you're looking at Renaissance Europe, if you're looking at the age of reason, then of course Enlightenment, reason, these becomes the grand narratives. These become the grand narratives of the time, because these were the dominant kind of thought processes through which people filtered their experiences. So similarly, Christianity, capitalism, colonialism, these would be some examples for grand narratives. But once we leave once we depart from the era of modernism and we enter into something called postmodernism, we see that our individual experiences can no longer be kind of culled up into some kind of a semblance of a structure. So again, the turn from modernism to postmodernism prefigures the turn from structuralism to post-structuralism. We see that the world is decentered. There is no one certain meaning. There are several multiple meanings around, right? So this is once again something that the individual is confronted with as he departs from from modernism to postmodernism. When he comes into postmodernism, we see that we are confronted with the fragmentation of our familiar past. We are no longer we are no longer in a sort of a very assured meaning making universe where there is a central authority, there is a central figure. All of these ideas are no longer there. So what we experience instead is a sense of fragmentation, right? And a very obvious sense of fragmentation at that. And so, you know, so the very idea within postmodernism, according to Lyotard, is that postmodernism denies the primacy of any such unifying meta narrative, any such unifying grand discourses like Christianity, colonialism, capitalism. All of these grand discourses are completely discarded. That Christianity can no longer religion can no longer serve as that meaning making, center of the universe. It cannot give us that that anchor that we need to hold on to in this increasingly fragmented world. So likewise, we need to do away with these ideas of meta narratives, or these ideas of grand narratives, and instead Lyotard says what we should prioritize would be little narratives. The word in French would be petit récit, which basically means uh, little narratives, right? So instead of one singular discourse, one singular narrative that tries to make sense of give us some kind of a meaning of about our past, we need to instead venture into several streams of meaning making discourses, several streams of narratives, and this is what he calls little narratives. No longer a grand unifying discourse, but rather several narratives fighting for fight the jostling for kind of primacy. That kind of a tendency is that kind of a tendency is what that is something that Lyotard identifies with postmodernism. The word postmodern itself, it carries within
Hello.
itself the hello. Yeah, is someone saying anything?
Will this session be uploaded on YouTube?
Yes, it
Because
will
I
be.
have to go outside. It's some urgency now.
Yeah, yeah, sure, sure. You can leave. The session will definitely be uploaded. They will upload
Thank
this.
you
Don't
so
worry.
much.
Yeah, yeah, sure. So the word postmodern, as you can very well understand, carries within itself the term modern. So the word postmodern, of course, derives from the word modern, but then it deviates from the modern as well, right? It is post in the sense of both temporally after, that is postmodern coming after modernism, a temporal, temporally it follows modernism, but then it is also, as far as meaning making is concerned, it also points to a sense of a beyond. So it is no longer restricted to modernism. It instead signals a going beyond modernism. The prefix post, it of course does two things. It marks the temporal shift from modernism to postmodernism. The temporal shift is there, so postmodernism following immediately after modernism. But also, as far as meaning making is concerned, it also marks a conceptually a sense of going beyond. So it is no longer restricted to the meanings, to the kind of prioritization of meaning that one would make within modernism. With postmodernism, we are going beyond modernism as well. And uh, once again, postmodernism and grand narratives, which are the governing principles of modernity, right? Which kind of bring together all of the different narrative and meta narrative forms of a particular culture. Grand narratives, what they do is very important to remember, is that grand narratives produce systematic accounts of how the world works. So these ideas of Christianity, like I mentioned, colonialism, like I mentioned, or capitalism that I mentioned, these kind of narratives help us to they produce these systematic accounts of how the world works and how the world kind of develops over history, and kind of gives human beings that an idea about their place in the universe and within the grand scheme of things. That is what you need to basically know about postmodernism, Lyotard, and the concept of grand narratives and little narratives. Okay. Um, there could be so much more that one could talk about as far as postmodernity and postmodernism is concerned, but these are some of the basic things that you could look into. And with this, I think I will probably stop talking about postmodernism and your this entire register of structuralism, post-structuralism, deconstruction, all of that. These are only some basic frameworks that I have laid down for you. You should maybe read up more, look into several other your what is it called, literary theory books, and you'll be introduced to a whole lot of other kind of topics. but these what I've covered is just some very basics, right? Now, I don't have much time, but today I would also like to talk about feminism as well, because if I take another session to do just post colonialism, then that would be fine, but I really cannot do away with not doing feminism today. So I would also like to talk about feminism. Now, at the outset, with feminism, the thing that we have to remember, first of all, the very basic binary distinction would be something between sex and gender. The word sex as opposed to the word gender. Sex is, of course, something that is biological, something that is physiological, something that is anatomical. So, sex is considered to be the material and the physical and the corporeal, right? It has to do with the corporeal human body. That is what sex would denote. And with gender, what we mean is gender is basically a cultural, sociological, ideological, linguistic category. That is gender. Gender is not pre given, sex is predetermined. Gender is not predetermined. Gender is it's not biologically determined. Sex could be, you could say that sex is biologically determined, but gender is it is socially determined, it's culturally determined. This is the basic idea that you need to kind of be familiar with when you kind of start off with feminism. Now, with feminism, the first person that we need to talk about is someone called Mary Wollstonecraft, and she writes this text, which I think people are familiar with, which is called "Vindication of the Rights of Women." Now, Mary Wollstonecraft's text. Okay, before I go into Mary Wollstonecraft's text, I need to again draw out one distinction between the word feminism and the term feminist. Now, feminism is a political stance, it's a political position. ISM, the ism, refers to a political stance, a political position. But feminist theory is a philosophical or it is an analytical approach that enables an individual to read cultural practices like, say, art, like film, like painting, like theater, like literature. So please be very clear about what is feminism. It is a political stance, it's a political position that you choose to identify with, and feminist theory is rather it's actually it's actually a philosophical analytical approach that enables us to read cultural practices, diverse cultural practices, music, arts, theater, film, anything, any cultural practice that you can think of. Now, with Mary Wollstonecraft, basically this kind of her text becomes the first major theoretical text about gender inequality, where she talks about gender inequality. And Mary Wollstonecraft's her basic premise would be that women are relegated to a secondary social position because they are not given proper education. She says that women need to be given women kind of need to be properly educated, they need to be given a proper education so that women can become the ideal companion of man. That is the idea. But what then Mary Wollstonecraft is doing, she's not saying that give women proper education so that they can empower themselves, right? But she's saying that give women proper education so that she can build herself up as the ideal companion of man. That is something that she's doing. So she kind of identifies education as the tool to subvert power binaries. That is something that Mary Wollstonecraft she talks about. But also what Mary Wollstonecraft talks about in that text, and why it is very important, is that she marks, however, the turn from femininity as natural to femininity as social. So she says that because she says that you give women education, then women will no longer be these obsessive, emotional people. They would become reasonable, rational individuals. So she says that once you give women the proper education similar to man's, you will see that women will no longer be feminine in the derogatory way that we think of women, like so emotional, so impulsive, so prone to feelings. That thing will disappear, and women will they might become rational and therefore better companion to men. That is the basic idea that Mary Wollstonecraft talks about in Vindication of the Rights of Woman. Next, of course, we start with feminism proper, of course, the different waves of feminism proper. And the first person that we talk about, and this is the first wave of, literary feminism, we talk about somebody called Virginia Woolf. Now, Virginia Woolf, as far as feminism is concerned, one of her texts that become really important, and this is kind of a longish essay of sorts, A Room of One's Own. Uh, it kind of Virginia Woolf kind of she becomes the first this exemplary figure of first wave Anglo-American feminism, and A Room of One's Own, in fact, in a way, prefigures many of the debates of feminism that one would encounter in the later years. What Virginia Woolf's main point seems to be that for women to become, literateurs, that is, the people who practice literary writing, for women to do that, they need a certain sense of independence, and that independence would come to them in the form of a sustainable income of their own and a separate space of her own. So, a room of one's own, of course, the title denotes that you need a separate space of your own and you need a sustainable income of your own. So she says that a woman would need 500 pounds a year, that would be a sustainable income, and she also needs a separate room of her own. So one thing that she says is 500 a year, 500 pounds a year stands for the power to contemplate. With money, an individual gains autonomy, and that would also translate to an autonomy of thought. So 500 pounds a year stands for the power to contemplate, and a lock on the door, the space of your own, a room of your own, means the power to think for yourself. So money, as well as your independent money and an independent space of your own, these are the two things that Virginia Woolf kind of talks about in her essay. Now, Virginia Woolf also kind of lays down several other important, formulations within this text. She says that the language that is available to women, that any female author, the kind of language that a female author would write with, that language is inherently patriarchal, right? And therefore, because that language is patriarchal, because that language is a creation of man and not a creation of woman, and the woman, despite so a woman, the language that she uses is not her, it's not a language that has been created by women, it's a language that is patriarchal and therefore created by man, and therefore that language is not able to sufficiently capture woman's experience. That is something that Virginia Woolf talks about in this essay. So she kind of talks about certain canonical women authors, and she says that these women authors, they have a peculiar tension within them. So that these women authors, they are kind of almost struggling, they're jostling with their masculine counterparts in both, they're both contesting their masculine counterparts, and they're also imitating their masculine counterparts. What she means is that by this duality of contestation and imitation, she means that these women writers are imitating their male counterparts as far as their writing in a man's language is concerned. The language that they're writing in is the patriarchal language. So there's a certain sense of imitation there. But the woman is not writing like a man. Her experiences are markedly different from a man's experience. So, whatever she is writing, whatever writing comes out of her own experiences, will be very, very different from that of a man. So, therein lies a contestation of sorts, where she is contesting she is contesting the dominant form of writing, where she is contesting the dominant male centered writing. She's not writing like a man, she's writing like a woman, but nonetheless she is using the language that patriarchy has given to her, a language that she has inherited from men. So a duality between imitation and contestation is at work here. But Virginia Woolf also praises Jane Austen in this regard, because she says that you know Austen, although Austen is often accused of being insensitive to the grand events of the time in her works, she does not give in to the temptation of the normative order. Like, if as opposed to the men who were writing during Jane Austen's time, they were writing about things of political importance. They were chronicling events of political importance, social, political, historical events they were writing about. But Jane Austen does not write about that. She writes about, relationships and marriage and village community and all of that. So in this way, Jane Austen is radical because she is not conforming to the masculine order of the day. She is contesting, in a way, the masculine order of the day, the dominant masculine order of the day. And that is why, for Virginia Woolf, Jane Austen kind of becomes the epitome of a woman author. And the other important formulation that Virginia Woolf talks about is, of course, the idea of androgyny, or the androgynous, mode. Basically, the idea is that she says that it is fatal to be simply a man, it is fatal to be simply a woman, right? So it is not enough for an individual to simply be a man, it is not enough for an individual to simply be a woman. What we need to do is we need to overcome the male female binary. So she kind of coins these two kind of terms. She says woman manly, and she says man womanly. So basically what she's trying to say with these two terms is that any individual, within themselves, they contain both these parts, that of a man and that of a woman. But in a man, maybe, the for a man it would be uh, woman manly. He has a part of his consciousness that would have some womanliness, some sort of characteristic that one would kind of associate with women. But then he would be more manly. But that would not mean that there is nothing womanly about a man. Like, there might be something that is womanly about a man, but then the manly characteristics would dominate, and vice versa for a woman. So woman manly and man womanly, these are the two terms that she talks about when she talks about androgyny. So androgyny basically again means that this duality of consciousness within an individual, of both a man and a woman. So a man is not simply endowed with the consciousness of a man. A man also is endowed with, in certain degrees, with the consciousness of a woman, and vice versa for a woman. A woman is not just endowed with the consciousness of simply a woman, she is also in certain degrees endowed with the consciousness of a man. So androgyny is this is what she means by androgyny. Another very important term, another very important idea that kind of Virginia Woolf talks about in her essay is this idea of Shakespeare's sisters. She imagines that Shakespeare, let's say she imagines that William Shakespeare had a sister by the name of Judith. So she kind of makes up this narrative of Shakespeare's sisters, and she says that let's call her Judith, and let's presume that she had the same talents as her male sibling. So she had the same talents as William Shakespeare did. But then what would have happened? Shakespeare was able to utilize his talents to such a great extent. But what would have happened to William Shakespeare's sister Judith, had she the same talents as him, and was she living in the same kind of same Elizabethan age that he was living in? She ends up, she concludes that she probably would have been sexually exploited. Judith would have been sexually exploited. She would have committed suicide, and she would be buried. She would lay buried somewhere in downtown London. That is the idea. So this is basically a metaphorical kind of an exploration. But what Virginia Woolf tries to say is that with the idea of Shakespeare's sisters, what she's trying to say is that in the Elizabethan age, there might have, not just simply in the Elizabethan age, in other ages as well, in subsequent ages as well, or maybe in ages prior to that, there might have been women writers. But patriarchal society, such in the way it works, would not have, irrespective of the amount of talent, the sheer genius that these women might have had possessed, patriarchal society would not have given them that kind of a, that kind of an exposure. They would never have had the same shot at fame that their male counterparts would have had. That is the basic idea that she's trying to explore with the concept of Shakespeare's sisters. And so what Virginia Woolf is trying to tell us, of course, is that we need to kind of, she says that the task of, feminism is to sort of unearth these forgotten female figures, this forgotten female literary activists, these forgotten female authors, and unearth these forgotten female authors. And this would become for us, this would she says that this would be the primary project of literary feminism. We do not only need to talk about only the masculine authors. We need to look into forgotten female authors. We need to kind of unearth them. We need to kind of take them out of their, of their burial grounds, as it were. And we have to kind of exhume that kind of feminist writing. That is the task that she sets out for future feminists. With Virginia Woolf again, we will move on to the second wave of Anglo-American literary feminism, and one of the most important people in this particular kind of segment would be someone called Elaine Showalter. Now, Elaine Showalter, the most important text of hers is, of course, A Literature of Their Own. This is a book. It's a collection of several essays, actually. And the important thing to note about this particular text is that Elaine Showalter identifies three basic kind of time period. She kind of identifies these three distinct periods of women's writing. So, the first phase is called the feminine phase, the second one is called the feminist phase, and the third one is called the female phase. And she says she identifies these three different phases, and she talks about how particular modes of women's writing evolved in each particular phase. So the feminine phase, the feminine phase of the feminine phase of writing would be somewhere roughly around 1840s to 1860s. And the authors that she kind of associates with this phase are people like the Bronte sisters and someone like George Eliot. And she says that in this particular phase, um, the idea, of course, is that man's language is the ideal language, and women were writing in imitation of man. They were trying to kind of replicate man's language. And this is what the feminine phase stands for, an imitation of the norm, an imitation of the patriarchal language. And then again, she talks about the feminist phase, and this would be sometime around the 1880s, 1890s, the heady days of the suffragette movement, the right to vote, and all of that. And here, woman was writing in contestation of man, not imitating man, but in contestation of man. But still, man kind of is still the center of, the center point of reference. Man is completely not decentered. Masculine writing is not decentered. Masculine writing is still a reference point, and women are writing in opposition to that, in contestation to that. That is the feminist phase. And then finally, she identifies what she calls a female phase, where man is no longer the point of reference. Man is no longer the yardstick of excellence, and women, in fact, can write like women, and they are neither writing in the feminine in the female phase. Women are not writing in opposition to man. Neither they are neither writing in opposition to man, nor are they writing in imitation of man. This is something that she says characterizes the female phase. So. The female phase, in fact, kind of marks, it's a dynamic the norm. They are no longer contesting the norm. Coming into its own in the female phase, according to Elaine Showalter. And Elaine Showalter also, of course, talks about, she also coins this one other term, which is very, very important. This is something that she calls gynocriticism. Okay. Yeah. So gyno criticism is basically this particular, it's basically a process wherein you are undertaking the archival task of unearthing forgotten female authors. Like, if you remember what I mentioned about Shakespeare's sisters, and what kind of Virginia Woolf she kind of sets the task out for future feminists. So that particular idea is kind of embodied within gynocriticism, wherein it basically has to do with kind of unearthing it pre or kind of, it's kind of like an archival task almost of trying to unearth particular modes of women's writing. That is what gynocriticism means. By engaging in feminist criticism only, we cannot really, what Virginia Woolf says, that you need to unearth Shakespeare's sisters. By simply engaging in gynocriticism, we cannot really, by engaging simply with feminist criticism, we cannot really fulfill the goal of feminism. We need to be able to look at, we need to be able to be aware of, and be able to identify particular modes of writing signaled by female authors. And this is what the term gynocriticism kind of comes to signify. And there are other people, of course, with that you can look up, of course, somebody called Betty Friedan. She writes a book called The Feminine Mystique, that is also very important, and you could actually look that up if you want to. And with this, Elaine Showalter, and then there's also somebody called Kate Millett. A very very important book that she writes is, of course, Sexual Politics. You could also maybe not, I won't say go read up because it's a pretty dense theoretical text, but you can have some brief idea. You can Google that up and have some brief idea about Kate Millett and what she's trying to do in Sexual Politics. But we also need to talk about the French feminists. They kind of become really important. So the first wave of French feminism, we have someone called Simone de Beauvoir. Now, Simone de Beauvoir, of course, a very very important text that she talks about, of course, is the second sex. It's a very important text, rather voluminous as well. But one of the main basic premises, like principles that the Beauvoir, she kind of sets out, is, of course, that once again she talks about the social construct of the woman. She says that one is not born a woman, but one becomes a woman. So womanliness is not something that is that you're born with, but it is something that is ascribed to you when you're growing up by society. So how womanliness, femininity, how all of these are social constructs. This is something that Beauvoir kind of sets out to kind of prove through this particular text, The Second Sex. Uh, some other very important people that you need to know is this. There's someone called Helen Sizu. Uh, the accents are missing because with my keyboard does not support the accents. There's someone called Helen Sizu. There's somebody called, of course, Luce Irigaray, and these are very very important French feminists and theoretical feminists, of course. And then there's someone called Julia Kristeva. So with Helen Sizu, she basically coins the term. She's well known for this term, écriture féminine, which basically means female writing. Uh, French term, écriture féminine, means female writing. And the basic idea that Sizu talks about is that female writing is marked by a certain, a certain sense of amorphousness, a certain sense of ambiguity. That is something that distinguishes female writing from writing by a man, from male writing. That is the basic premise for Helen Sizu. She says that masculine writing, writing by a man, is, it is monosexual, it is monolithic. A man, when he writes only about his own problems, he writes about his own issues. But with women, there is a significant difference. Within women's writing, the prose or the kind of writing, the language, the style, all of it is very convoluted, it is very amorphous, it is not a direct ramrod like, you know uh, 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 approach that a woman follows when she is writing. A man follows this direct ramrod like approach, but a woman does not do that. Her writing is convoluted, her writing is amorphous, and sometimes, to the untrained eye, her writing might even be senseless. So men write in a language which is their sex creation, because I spoke about patriarchal language. So men writing in the language that their sex has created about, and they talk about simply their problems only. And for women, therefore, what happens is when women have to write in that kind of a language, then they cannot do justice to their personal experiences, to the unique female experience. They cannot do justice to that when they're writing in a patriarchal language. So instead, they have to kind of deform that patriarchal language into a sort of formlessness, into a sort of amorphity, a sort of ambiguousness, right? And this convolutedness marks the nature of women's writing. This is something that Helen Sisu talks about when when she talks about the term écriture féminine. And then with Luz Irigaray, basically Luz Irigaray again, one very important text of hers would be this one text called "This Sex Which Is Not One." Okay. Uh, in this particular text, she basically what she's doing is that she says that as she kind of tries to kind of she draws parallels between female writing and the female body. Basically the point seems to be that the female sex is dissipated all throughout the female body, right? There are several erogenic kind of zones in the female body, not just one, as opposed to the male body. So the female sex is dissipated all over the female body, and that kind of a amorphous kind of a dissipation is also something that is mirrored in female writing. That is the basic argument that Irigaray forwards. So but then she says that the very fact that in the female body, the very fact that sex is dissipated all over, and this actually is kind of taken up by the patriarchal normative order of the day to overpower the woman, to kind of constrict her within several strict definitions and several strict categories. But Irigaray says that women need to kind of break out of that kind of a bond, that kind of a shackle, and instead they need to embrace that amorphousness, that sense of ambiguity. They need to embrace that both in their bodies, biological bodies, and also through their writings. So she says that that amorphousness, that is our wealth. You need not discard that, and you need not listen to the normative patriarchal order of the day and discard that amorphous kind of dissipated sexuality that is dissipated all across your body. You rather need to embrace that, and you need to embrace that also through your writing. Your writing should reflect that amorphousness that is that becomes your biological kind of characteristic. Your writing should kind of reflect that. That is the idea that Luz Irigaray forwards. And therefore, she says that female writing is not uniform, it is in fact pluriformal. That is, it is plural. So it kind of, takes on uh, different forms. It takes on plural forms. That is what she means by pluriformal nature of writing for women. And then again, another text by Irigaray that is very, very important is one she calls the speculum of the other woman. This is a text that is very, very theoretical and kind of pretty dense as well. I won't ask you to go and read the text, but this is a name that you need to remember. Once again, she deals with. See, Irigaray's writing has mostly to a lot to do with the female sex and the female body. So women's writing would mirror the female sex. That is the basic idea that Irigaray tries to explore in all of her writings. And in the speculum of the other woman, that is also something that she does. Now, Julia Kristeva. Now, Julia Kristeva, she also kind of tries to relate women's writing with the with woman's body. That is also something she does. But one very important text by Kristeva is called "Women's Time." You can actually look up these texts just to get a brief idea of what they mean and what kind of ideas they're trying to kind of propagate. But don't go up and read the whole text. Just maybe Google it, a few summaries, a few blog posts, that would help. But basically, she talks about, she kind of uses this binary between linearity and circularity. What she's trying to say is that m- masculine writing is linear. It follows a kind of a straight, linear, horizontal time frame. But with women's writing, and this adds to the amorphousness, the convolutedness of women's writing, there is this sense of a circularity at work. And the circularity that she kind of emphasizes as the characteristic of women's writing is something that she derives from the woman's body as such. You know, the biological clock in a woman's body is it kind of takes up a very circular framework. So you have menstruation and then childbirth. So all these kind of components kind of take on a circular kind of a time frame in a woman's body. And then Julia Kristeva kind of takes this circularity of the woman's body as the kind of framework for her writing and for women's writing. And she says that this kind of a convolutedness, amorphity, circularity that runs all throughout women's body is also something that is reflected or mirrored in their writing. This is the basic premise of Julia Kristeva's Women's Time. And she kind of also exhorts that women should no longer try to imitate men and try to kind of keep to this linear sort of a narrative. Instead, they should try to explore women's experiences, their individual experiences in all its ambiguity, in all its amorphousness, in all its circularity. That is something that Julia Kristeva kind of sets out with. This is roughly, the French, as far as French feminism is concerned. But then within feminism, there are also other waves. We talk about a third wave, we talk about a possible fourth wave. There are terms like post-feminism in vogue. So what exactly necessitated the rise of these terms? Basically, what happens is with the first wave of feminism and with the French wave of feminism, what is happening is these kind of feminisms are, they are Eurocentric feminisms. These are feminisms, these are theories. The theories that are being laid down with these kind of feminisms is, it's feminism with a capital F, as opposed to feminism with a small f. The idea is that uh, with the French feminists and with the Anglo American feminists, these feminisms are non-white women would require, women in other parts of the world apart from Europe would require. So there was within feminism there was some kind of a universalizing, some kind of an essentializing that was going on. And you need to be able to kind of break away from an universalizing, essentializing attempt, because these women, these feminist theorists, they were only talking from a very urban, white, middle class, Eurocentric point of view. They were not really taking into context. They were not really considering the kind of feminism that a woman in a third world country would require, that an African woman would require, that an Indian woman in colonial India would require. They were not really talking about that. So these kind of limitations within the first and the second wave of feminism gave rise to, post feminisms, gave rise to the third wave and the fourth and the possible fourth wave of feminism. So some of the people within the succeeding waves of feminism who tried to kind of pluralize feminism as opposed to a single feminism with a capital F, these women were now talking about, these theorists were talking about feminisms, with a small f. So localized feminisms, feminisms that would look into local geopolitical concerns. So feminisms with a small f would now kind of try to look into the problems and issues faced by women in Africa, women in India, Savarna women, Dalit women, lesbian women. All of these ideas, the very idea of intersectionality, kind of comes into being from here onwards. So within black feminism, if we talk about black feminism, we have people like Alice Walker. Alice Walker, in fact, she coins this term called womanisms, wherein she again, with this particular term, she's trying to kind of signal this sense of plurality within feminism. On the we really cannot, because see, we the earlier waves of feminism were really context specific, right? You could not talk about black feminisms from the point of view of an Anglo-American woman like Virginia Woolf or Ellen Showalter. You could not do that. So you needed other theories that would be context specific, culture specific to other women in different parts of the world. So Alice Walker talks about womanism, and this particular term kind of signals a sort of intersectionality, a sort of plurality that takes into account the diverse disparate experiences of women all over the world, women who are in different socio-political geographical contexts. That is the idea. And then we have, of course, someone called Chandra Talpade Mohanty. Now, Chandra Talpade Mohanty is again a very famous theorist. She basically talks about, third world feminism. So, what about women? What kind of feminism? What kind of activism? What kind of feminist activism? What kind of theoretical frameworks do we need to frame as far as feminism is concerned for women residing in the third world? So Chandra Talpade Mohanty kind of talks about issues pertaining to women in the third world. So maybe you could look up Chandra Talpade Mohanty and maybe familiarize yourself with a few of her concepts if you want to. But remember the name and the area that she is associated with. And then also we have several other forms of feminism coming into place. We talk about a body positive feminism, a sex positive feminism, where in these kind of feminisms women are kind of the advice is that you no longer need to shy away from sex, you no longer need to shy away from your kind of bodily sexual desires. That is not something that you need to do. uh, that is the idea with sex positive feminism, with body positive feminism. So reclaim your body, reclaim your sexuality. These kind of become the catchwords, the slogans for the third wave of sex positive feminism. That is kind of important. And this kind of a sex positive and body positive feminism kind of comes up from the 1980s onwards, and that happens primarily through a feminist engagement with sex work and pornography. As feminist theorists look into these areas of culture like sex work and prostitution and pornography, and they kind of come up with theorizations of their own, wherein they talk wherein they kind of there have been varied kind of there have been debates about this as well. So is pornography good, is pornography bad, is pornography so sex positive feminists would argue that yes, pornography and sex work is liberating, it is empowering. But then there are the theorists within feminism who would argue that pornography and sex work at the end of the day are not liberating, they are almost debilitating to women. So there are debates regarding that as well. But you have to remember that sex positive and body positive feminism, the third wave of feminism that kind of mostly deals with these ideas, kind of comes into its own sometime around the 1980s, with an increased or an engagement of women, feminist theorists with sex work and pornography. And also, when we talk about these new forms of feminism, the other thing that we need to remember is that one of the other major contributions of these kind of feminisms, in the third wave and the fourth wave, is that earlier, feminism was mostly cis het. Feminism was, kind of confined to this binary of man versus woman, right? Only these two binaries, so whatever, theoretical kind of constructions and whatever theoretical subversions were made within the ambit of this man woman heterosexual kind of a relationship. That was the major area of criticism. But now what comes out within with these new waves of feminism, of course, in the post feminist era, I would like to call it that, is that now there is no kind of central binary. So man woman is no longer the accepted binary. So we are also looking at other kinds of relationships rather than heterosexual relationships. We're looking into homosexual relationships as well. We're looking into relationships that women have with each other. Those could be sexual relationships as well. So women women relationships as opposed to man woman relationship. So And this is how, the entire queer theory or LGBTQIA plus, this entire idea kind of emanates, it originates from this kind of a formulation. So so you see why the third wave and the fourth wave and the succeeding post feminist movements are kind of important. And then there is also one other area that I would like to just touch upon. You can definitely look this up on your own. There is also a a technical, a techno responsive side to feminism. And that basically kind of looks at the intersection between machines, between technologies, and between technologies and feminism. That is a techno responsive feminism. And there are two kind of major kind of sides to that. One is a techno phoric feminism, which kind of as the term kind of suggests, technophoric technology, euphoria. So celebrating the intersection of euphoric celebration of the intersection of feminism and technology. And then again, we have something called the technophobic kind of a feminism, which of course, as the name pretty well suggests, is where technology, when it intersects with feminism, it kind of leads to a certain fear, a certain skepticism, a certain distrust of this kind of an intersection. Now, as far as techno positive feminism or technophoric feminism is concerned, there are several kind of areas that one can look into. Of course, one of these would be cyber feminism. Then another could be, of course, cyborg feminism. And as far as cyborg feminism is concerned, there is one person that you can look up. Her name is Donna Haraway, DONNAHARAWay, if I'm not mistaken. Google up these names. Donna Haraway kind of gives out this idea of the cyborg, and that kind of becomes really important for Donna Haraway. And basically, what Haraway is, she's trying to say with the idea of the cyborg is that the cyborg uh, is this kind of a formulation, according to Donna Haraway, where uh, the it is like machine meets human. That kind of an interaction, that kind of an intersection, is what she calls a cyborg. And if there is no more, with the idea of the cyborg, with the introduction of the cyborg, if there is no more a binary between technology and between what is animate and what is inanimate, between what is living and what is non-living, then if that kind of prefigures a destabilization of binaries, then it also kind of also anticipates, or it also kind of prefigures another destabilization. So we have already seen how the man woman binary has been completely destabilized with the onslaught of feminism. And then with Donna Haraway, she kind of takes it a notch higher, and she says that with the introduction of cyborg, man meets machine, and therefore the kind of this distinction between what is animate and what is inanimate also kind of falls flat. Donna Haraway kind of basically theorizes on cyborg feminism, and this is a term that you can look up if you want to. And as regards the technophobic side of feminism, it basically, a brilliant example would be something like ecofeminism. Because ecofeminism is kind of on the technocritical side. It kind of criticizes technology. It says that with the onslaught of technology, we are destroying our ecology, we are destroying our environment. Industries are being set up, machines are being built, factories are being built, and criticized, right? But of course, with recourse to ecology and the environment. And here, of course, the idea is that the masculinist order of the day, the technologically advanced order of the day, which is associated with, of course, the masculinist order of the day, is trying to, kill the earth. It is trying to devastate Mother Earth. That is the idea. Just like the masculinist order of the day, the patriarchal order of the day, tries to exploit the female body. That is the relationality that ecofeminism draws upon between ecology and the earth and the environment on the one hand, and the feminine body and the female body on the other hand. So these are some of the basic kind of topics, broad topics that you could look into for feminism. And I think I will stop here today with that. I still have, I think, post colonial theory to talk about, but today I think we have already done 2.5 hours, and I think then we kind of maybe can kind of reschedule one more session if you'd want on post colonial theory sometime in the coming week, maybe 1 hour or maybe 45 minutes to 1 hour, and we could complete post colonial theory, and then I think I would be done with my part of literary theory, and Oyonda is going to take on whatever other relevant registers are kind of left. But once again, what I would like to say is that the terms, the names that that we have kind of gone through in this particular session, these are only a preliminary and a very basic introduction to some of the key concepts in these particular areas, and it would do you a whole deal of good if you actually google up these terms, these authors, these texts, and read up a bit on your own. I'm not asking you to read up extensively the theoretical texts themselves, but google up this author, google up this idea, like google up gynocriticism, look up écriture féminine, and familiarize yourself with the concepts, with some of the key texts as well. So this is something that you could do. If we do not, will there be a lecture on Indian literature? Yes, there would be a lecture on Indian literature. Oyon, the one who the person who conducted the session yesterday, he would be doing, I think, taking up Indian literature, and maybe in the upcoming kind of sessions, I think tomorrow or the day after, he's definitely going to do Indian literature with you. So I think that will be it for today, and let's see if people want another session on post colonial theory. If you people want, then I could do that one more session, maybe 45 minutes to 1 hour, if you think that is important. If not, and if you think you can do it on your own, then that will be fantastic as well. But okay, fine. So I'll talk to Madhuri Madi, and I think I'll ask them to give me one more session with you. Maybe it won't be like a long drawn out session of 2.5 hours as well. It would just be maybe 40 minutes to kind of 1 hour. I would just introduce you to some basic concepts and some basic thinkers who become important for post colonial theory, and then I think we can call and then we can close this off. So I think then I'll close off today's session. Thank you so much for joining, however